Hey there, Guy from Midwinter Minis here. I recently had a little painting session with my friend and regular 40k opponent Ant, and I thought it might be useful for some of you to see how he really quickly paints his Cadian shock troops. It's a nice simple scheme that lets you whip through a large batch of troops in next to no time, easily a squad per session.
Hi everyone, I'm Ant. So if we just jump straight into it, the first thing I do is give all the models I'll be painting in one session a nice spray undercoat with CITADEL Zandri Dust. This will be the base colour for the armour, shoulder pads and helmets, so you can get a really solid base coat down really quickly. The first colour that we'll be painting on using our brush will be CITADEL Death Guard green. Any old green will really do, so long as it's like a drab military style green. We'll use this green to paint the fatigues. These shock troops are really forgiving to paint and with lots of nice open areas that you can get to. At all of these stages, don't worry too much about being too neat, as we can fix any mistakes later on. Next up, we'll use the black paint. I'm using Abaddon Black in this case, and we'll paint the furniture of the lasgun. That's the casing bit. That's right, isn't it, Guy?
That's the one.
And we're also going to be painting their boots. You could use a thinner coat on their boots in order to actually let some of the highlights come through, and that might make it easier later on when you're adding some additional highlight colours. Some of the models have grenades and some have knives, so if they've got any of those bits and bobs, paint them black too. Next, we're just going to use a silver paint, so I'm using CITADEL Leadbelcher. I'm a bit of a CITADEL fanboy really, just not the pots. And we'll be using our silver to pick out the barrel, the stock and any other visible bits of the handle and the trigger mechanism, as well as the magazine of the lasgun. After you're done with all the silver bits, the next thing we're going to take care of is their fleshy skin. So using the Fleshtone of any choice that you want, I mean I'm using Cadian Fleshtone because why not, but I'm going to be painting their faces and their exposed hands. Once you're happy that you've got all of the skin done, crack out your favourite gold paint. So Guy's lent me his lovely little pot of shining gold. Oh, it's like an antique. And I'm just going to paint the motif on their helmets, lasgun and canteens if they've got them. To add some really quick texture and colour to the bases, I'm using Astrogranite, but you can obviously use any texture that you want to fit the scheme of your army. Don't worry if you get a little bit of overspill when you're painting on your texture, you can always deal with that quite easily. Guy, I hear you like to wipe the rim with your finger, but as I'm a bit of a gentleman and a connoisseur, I prefer to use a soft and absorbent tissue paper. That's it. All clean. Now, it's really at this point you might just want to quickly have a little check around each of the models and fix any bits that you might have spilled colours over and just give them a nice general touch up. So this is how the model should look before we go into the wash stage. If you want to go that extra little bit further, you can also use your detail brush to paint their eyes white. Doing this now before the wash makes the effect much more subtle and a bit more natural and just gives a little bit of shade into the sockets. Now I'm using white air paint here that's actually thinned down quite a bit, and this just makes it really easy to nicely flow, so there's no more guessing with the thinning down. It's really quick, really simple to do edge highlighting as well, so nice top tip. So once everything's dried and you're happy with all your base coats, we're now going to apply a brown wash to the whole model. So I'm using Guy's DIY dip wash. And if you want to see how to make this cheap and effective wash, check out the video that just popped up. But you could just use Agrax Earthshade as a nice substitute for this. While you're giving each one of your models a nice bath, you can also add some optional torture noises. Alright, spill the beans! Now that they've all had their lovely bath in the brown wash, we're going to whip away any of the excess that pulls a bit too much on some of the surfaces, and then we're just going to let the model dry before starting the next steps. If you're batch painting a whole squad, this usually works out quite well, as by the time you finish your last model, the first one will probably be dry, especially in this heat that we've been having. After the model's dry, we're now going to just tidy up the armour plates, so I'm just using that Zandri Dust paint, thinned with a tiny little bit of water just to catch those large areas. Make sure to avoid the recesses to leave that nice shading visible. So we're focusing on the big smooth areas of the helmet, shoulder pads and the back armour. Don't bother too much with the front armour because sometimes it's just too awkward to get into. These guys are often holding their las guns really close to their chests because they don't want to lose them. I then mixed a slightly lighter green using a 1:1 ratio of Death Guard green with some white paint, and I've used this mixture to lightly dry brush the fatigues. And because the colours in this scheme are really close to each other, it really is quite forgiving, so you only really have to avoid the guns and the boot, so it makes this step really fast and really easy to do. I then mixed a very subtle dark grey highlight with just a touch of white added to that black paint again. And I used this just to catch a couple of the raised detail and sharp edges on the las guns and boots. You don't need to go too crazy at this step, just keep it really simple and avoid the recesses. Don't overdo it, as we still want these to look black and not grey. You can then use the same grey you just mixed to dry brush over the texture we added to the base, if you're following this scheme exactly. The very last step was just to paint the rims of the base with 2 coats of black paint, but again, you can obviously paint these any way you like to match the theme of your army. So there you go, in just over 20 minutes per model you've got a pretty serviceable Cadian shock troop that looks great in a squad and is ready to give you those sweet, sweet command points. Or you can just sit on some objectives, be a bit of a nuisance and make those really low point battalions. I hope you found this really useful, but this is my first time painting on camera, so go easy in the comments, okay?
That's it for this episode. Bye for now, everyone.
Cheers, bye.